Okay, good evening, everybody. This is the regularly scheduled meeting of the Somerville Planning Board. It is 6:06 p.m. on the 19th of December, 2024. I'm Mike Capuano. I'm the chairman of the Planning Board. With me tonight is our Vice Chair, Amelia Aboff, our clerk, Jahan Habib, and our members, Lynn Richards, Michael McNeely, and Luke Schuster. The Planning Board has a quorum for the events and hearings that we're going to be bringing up this evening. Pursuant to the Acts of Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023, this meeting of the Planning Board is going to be conducted via remote participation. A video recording of these proceedings will be available on the city's website or by emailing planning@somervillema.gov. This meeting is being recorded. I have been asked to inform both the members of the board as well as members of the public that our next scheduled meeting is January 16th, 2025, because we will not be holding a January 2nd meeting due to a lack of quorum. So we have a number of items on our agenda this evening that we'll be bringing up. First is an approval of meeting minutes from November 21st. We then have requests for continuances from two of our applicants. We'll be bringing up two applicants for business, and depending on whether we have time at the end and or want to take the time at the end, we'll have other business. I'm sorry, we also have two administration proposed amendments that we'll be recommending to the Land Use Committee and seeing what they do with it. So what I'd like to do first is take up the meeting minutes from November 21st, 2024. Has everybody had an opportunity to review? Does anybody have any suggested revisions? Seeing none, the chair moves to approve those draft meeting minutes as the meeting minutes of the Planning Board, seconded by Amelia. Steve, can you please call the roll?
Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Lynn Richards?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
And Michael Capuano.
Aye. We have a request from 45 Mystic Avenue to continue to the January 16th meeting. Chair moves to continue that agenda item, seconded by Amelia. Steve, please call the roll.
Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Lynn Richards?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
And Michael Capuano.
Aye. The agenda item is continued. Next is 720 to 722 Broadway. They have also requested a continuance to January 16. The chair moves to continue that agenda item, seconded by Amelia. Steve, please call the roll.
Luke Schuster?
Aye.
Michael McNeely?
Aye.
Lynn Richards?
Aye.
Jahan Habib?
Aye.
Amelia Aboff?
Aye.
And Michael Capuano.
Aye. Okay. We have two items of that are public hearings. Actually, one is a public meeting, and it's 50 Webster Street, which I'm going to take up first. It's not a public, it's a public meeting. Is that right, Steve? It's not a public hearing?
That's correct. It's not a public hearing. There wasn't a public notice.
Yep. So Jahan does not need to read into the record any notice, but 50 Webster Street is looking to get a final plat plan approval. I'm wondering if there's a representative from this particular applicant who can be unmuted and or
Steve Carey, PPZ. We're promoting Greg Karchevsky. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. I apologize. But he's the representative for the app.
Okay. Hey, Greg, long time no see.
Good evening, Chair Capuano and members of the board. Appreciate the chance to be here tonight. Can you hear me okay?
Of course.
Terrific. My name's Greg Karcheski. I'm the president of US2. We're the designated master developer for the Union Square revitalization. Our offices are located at 10 Prospect. We moved from 31 Union to 10 Prospect about a year ago. Thank you for the chance to be before you this evening. We're here seeking final subdivision plan approval to facilitate the redevelopment of one of the blocks within the Union Square revitalization, the D 3.1 block, into a commercial building, a civic space, and a thoroughfare. The final plan that was submitted is substantively the same as the preliminary plat plan that was part of our subdivision plan approval for 50 Webster, which the planning board unanimously approved back in August of 2022. So we're before you to get the final plat approved, and we're breaking the property into 3 lots, one for a commercial space or commercial building per its approval, one for the approved civic space, and one for the approved thoroughfare. And so this will be the next step towards us redeveloping that site into the neighborhood's second commercial building. The project will further the Union Square revitalization's goal of really reestablishing Union Square as Somerville's commercial hub. And it'll also add some valuable public space for the community. And if approved this evening, we would greatly appreciate your assistance in signing the final plan Mylar as quickly as possible. I think staff probably communicated that. Timely execution and recording of the plat before the end of the year are essential to keeping our permitting process on track. So we appreciate your consideration there. And thanks for considering this evening and appreciate your time. And if there's any questions, I'm certainly able to answer them.
Of course. No, thanks, Greg. I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions of Greg or the staff at this point. This is me, very, very straightforward and a step in the next logical process to the development of the site. But anybody have anything we'd like to add? Okay. Well, the purpose of this public meeting, Michael, I know you had made a request or an inquiry earlier about recusal. I don't believe anybody. So in the planning board's current practice is to have all voting members sign the Mylar. And the applicant is requesting the Mylar to be signed by 12/31, which is a reasonably quick turnaround, but in light of the holiday weeks. So my suggestion is not necessarily for recusal from the vote, because that would indicate some sort of potential conflict of interest. It would be an abstention from the vote. So if someone is not able to sign the Mylar at City Hall by 12/31, I would suggest that that person abstain from the vote. My understanding is, Michael, you are the only person that requires an abstention. I just want to make sure that we have a quorum to be able to vote on that before we move forward. Does anybody else have an issue with being able to get to City Hall and signing prior to 12/31? Okay. Okay. Then in that case, my suggestion is to just abstain, to vote an abstention from the vote instead of a recusal. Just, recusal is a thing, and abstention is a different thing. So with that in mind, the chair moves to, I guess, find that the final plat plan is substantially the same as the preliminary plan and is sufficient to be signed by the planning board and then submitted to the appropriate entity following that. Seconded by Amelia. Steve, can I have a please roll call, please?
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Congratulations. Good luck.
Thank you for your help. Have a great holiday. Appreciate your time this
Of
evening.
course. Nice seeing you, Greg. Boy, okay. We have 2 items. I'm going to take items out of order. Because I want to take Cummings Street last. I'm going to take up the other items on our agenda, which are the two zoning amendments that the planning board needs to make a recommendation to the land use committee on. And so the first one I'm going to take up is the building types one. So the request for amendment to allow building types for residents in our zoning district to be permitted in the UR district. You all, I believe, were in attendance at the joint hearing where this was presented. Yes, I see Luke. Were you not?
Whether or not people were in attendance, just like to state for the record that I watched the video online because I was not in attendance and submitted the affidavit, both for the joint land use committee meeting and also for the full planning board meeting where we discussed the 20 to 23 Cummings Street. So that's been submitted.
Yep. I appreciate the disclosure, Luke. And by the way, Luke, is it the first time this has been the case? You also have to submit that to the clerk, right?
Yeah, I've done that. Yep.
Okay, just making
Yep.
sure everything's
Yep.
crossed out. Wonderful. So we have this particular proposed zoning amendment. Does anybody have any comments or questions of staff? Yep, Amelia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I raised this briefly at the land use committee hearing, and I don't know if there is a more fulsome answer in this setting, but is there not a mechanism where the very narrow category of variances that this is meant to avoid could be dealt with administratively or through some other process? I just worry that we're setting ourselves up to not take advantage of like a very intentional zoning mechanism that had been established not too long ago. I completely understand and am sympathetic to the desire to have, existing homeowners not have to jump through a lot of hoops to make minor changes, but I'm also aware that in the Cambridge and Somerville markets, like redeveloping a triple decker that's in poor condition as a single family home is in fact something that there is a market for. And I don't think that would happen too often, but I'd like it to happen not at all in the UR district.
I have some thoughts on that, but I'd like to hear from staff first.
Mr. Chair, this is Emily Hutchings. Hi. So I think policy-wise, everyone is in agreement that the goal is not to reduce density, not to facilitate that, but just to allow minor changes again. So a lot of the times, if you have a non-conforming building type, the hardship variance process is actually less burdensome than the special permit process for non-conformities where you have to have a neighborhood meeting. We are looking into other mechanisms where we can reduce the possibilities of density reduction. For these types of buildings, we do think that this amendment will do more good than harm in the context of existing homeowners, existing housing. But that said, this is a concern that is on our radar and we are actively looking into. I don't know if that answers your question. It's one that definitely warrants some more research.
Yeah, Amelia, you still have the floor.
I'm sorry, I just don't, is there any particular urgency to this being brought about now? I appreciate that staff acknowledges that it's an imperfect solution, and staff has a fantastic track record of coming up with very clever ways to split the difference on these types of issues. Is there any chance that in, 2 months, 6 months, we will have a better mechanism to achieve this?
I'm not certain of that. I think what we've come up with at this point is the best mechanism that we have. Other things that we're looking at are going to take some additional time, and we think there is value in moving this forward now. We have a significant number of existing 1 and 2 families in the UR district, not just 3 families. And the number of applications that we receive, the number of individuals that have concerns or are limited from making changes that are minor. Again, we think there's going to be more benefit to them than harm, and potentially reducing the number of units. We also think that what's existing in the UR district provides enough value in the real estate market that the number of, if we do lose units, I think it will be minimal compared to what we gain elsewhere.
And by adding the are we effectively folding the UR district into the MBTA communities eligible zone then by making those building topologies eligible, or those are still distinct and that is only for buildings that are zoned NR?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the NR district remains the only district that falls under the MBTA Communities Act. The UR district will remain separate and not included in MBTA communities at this time.
Thank you.
And I do recognize that this is a recommendation by the planning board to the land use committee, which, for all of the weight that our recommendation apparently holds. With no other comments by the planning board, the chair moves to recommend this proposed zoning amendment to the land use committee for adoption. Second by Amelia. Steve, can I please have a roll call?
Luke Schuster,
Mr. Chair,
I see Amelia.
would you entertain a recommendation with the request that City Council support staff's continued efforts to come up with a mechanism that would fine tune this a little bit more?
I'm happy to do that. I also, Amelia, I am cognizant of your prescient thoughts a few weeks ago as it relates to recommendations by the planning board to the land use committee on the recommendations and in considerations we place on them. But with that in mind, I'm happy to amend my motion to include Amelia's comments and suggestion. I see Michael first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I share some of Vice Chair Aboff's concerns here, in particular with trying to do whatever we can to zero out the conversion to 1 family. So I think it's worth adding these comments.
Yeah, I'll just say, kind of in response to the concern, I don't necessarily see that happening with terrible amounts of frequency, but I'm happy to pass along our concern that it might happen. I think most folks will want to build up to what they can instead of going the reverse, but yeah, Michael.
I'm sorry, I meant to include that as a form of justification for why I think the recommendation should include supporting the staff to explore alternative solutions.
Yep. Totally fine. Luke, I saw you next.
Yeah, I'm just hesitate to make the conversation so much longer, but I'll just say what's on my mind, which is I have some sympathy for what's being raised too. So I just, number one, appreciate Amelia raising this. And I also appreciate the sense that it's not likely to lead to great, downscaling of density. But I don't totally track yet how us voting yes on this recommendation, but also recommending staff investigate it more could be squared. Because it's either yes, we should think they should do it, or no, it needs to be investigated more. So maybe I'm not totally tracking the amendment idea.
So I'll tell you what. So the planning board, when it makes recommendations to the land use committee, generally does one of three things. We make a positive recommendation with suggestions. We make a neutral recommendation in most circumstances where we think there might be a legal consideration that a yes recommendation might not be supported by the law. And we almost never make a no recommendation, very, very infrequently. So the idea of making a yes recommendation with considerations, even if we might be a little bit skeptical about what that means, is in keeping with the planning board's general practice.
Mr. Chair, if I may add,
Yep.
just may or may not be saying the same thing, but a little bit more bluntly. If we think city council is inclined to adopt something regardless of our recommendation, which in this case, it's my position that they probably are, then I think that adding a note of context creates an environment where they might think a little bit harder about it, whereas a no with context is something they are likely to ignore in the same way they will ignore a no. So that's just my my personal take, but it informs how I think about these.
Amelia, your faithfulness is admirable
It's
on
the
what will be
optimism.
considered. So with that in mind, does anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up before we proceed with the vote? Yeah, the chair's amended motion is to make the recommendation for a positive adoption with the considerations raised by Amelia and discussed by the board. Seconded by Amelia. So Steve, if we can call the roll.
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff.
Aye.
And Michael Capuano.
Okay, we have a generally positive recommendation. Next is an administration recommendation that we amend the ordinance to improve the regulation of bicycle parking. Does anybody have any comments or questions on this one outside of it seemed fine and nobody raised any issues on public testimony? Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves to recommend adoption of this proposed amendment. Seconded by Amelia. Steve, please call the roll.
Schuster,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Aye. Unanimous recommendation for adoption. The next item on the agenda will be Cummings Street, but what I want to do real quickly is take a very, very brief 2-minute recess. I just need to address one quick thing at home, and then we can reconvene. Luke, I do not mean to put you out, and I do not mean that this will be counted against any side discussion you and I have had. But the planning board will reconvene at 6:35. So it is 6:36. We are waiting on Lynn to return. And yeah, there we go. Lynn, can you hear us?
Yeah, perfectly. Sorry,
Okay.
I got caught doing something else and then anyway.
Totally okay. The planning board is back. For the purpose of the record, we have a full contingent of the planning board. We're going to re-welcome the applicant and applicant team for 2023 Cummings Street. So if that applicant and team can be unmuted and shared, promoted, whatever is required, let them be full participants in this meeting. I would appreciate it. For anybody on the applicant team, by the way, that needs to be recognized, I'm seeing some folks raise their hands, so.
Yep, this is Steve Carey and PPZ. Apologies. I will promote Anthony Galuccio, John Maxon, Ryan Souls, Michael Jardina, and Dan Keachens.
Anthony, is there anybody else on your team that needs to be unmuted?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ryan Souls, Director of Development, Brian Dugdale, Co-Counsel. And we could probably play it by year after that. Oh, sorry. Also, Pat Doniford from VHB. You're gonna get me in trouble.
It looks like we have everyone now, so we should be set.
Anthony, everybody who's paying you needs to be unmuted.
That's it. That's the issue.
This is Steve Carey and PPZ. We also see Erica Johnson with their hand raised. Are they also part of the team?
Yeah, that's fine.
Great.
Oh, and Chris, Ryan, do you want Christine Audette? She does all the work. I'm fine.
She wants to raise her hand. Happy to have her. Got a full team here. And I think Eric is sharing the presentation, but happy to pull it up as well.
Yeah, I'll share my screen.
Excellent.
Oh, Steve, can you allow sharing?
Yes. One moment. Who is it you would like to be the presenter?
Erica,
Yep, I'm the presenter.
awesome. Mr. Chair, are we ready?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. Thank you. Honorable members of the board, my name's Anthony Galuccio. I'm a partner with Galuccio and Watson, land use attorney representing Greystar. I think we've sort of introduced folks by way of getting them on as panelists. Brian Dugdale, co-counsel, is here, and obviously Ryan Souls, Director of Development. As the board knows, we had I thought a productive meeting to open this case. A lot of issues got covered, and we got some questions that some were covered during the meeting and others we agreed to come back and respond to. So really the substance of tonight is to respond to those outstanding issues. So we'll try to be as brief and pointed as possible. Those relate to planning board comments, mobility staff memo, and some responses that we've been working. I want to just thank Andrew. He's been phenomenal, and a ton of work has gone into this to get to point of agreement on phasing. So those are the three topics. The first issue related to sort of connectivity issues. The board had asked for better renderings and better perspective on how the parcels relate to the adjacent neighborhoods. Lynn had some comments about specific points of crossing in the underpass. So first I'm going to have Michael just go over some of those additional renderings to talk about that. We have produced a draft economic development covenant, which we thought it would be responsive to include as part of that financial commitments to pedestrian crossing and underpass as infrastructure projects that we would cover in the additional linkage that we've committed to. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But Michael, why don't you come on and you can walk through these slides?
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. So yes, as Anthony just outlined, we wanted to zoom our context drawing out a little bit and show basically the 4 adjacent neighborhoods. Of course, there are more neighborhoods, but these, I think, physically sort of come up against. So starting at the northern part of the drawing is 10 Hills. And I'm going to circle back about the adjacency. And then we have Winter Hill to the plan west and East Somerville on the southern part. And then Assembly Square neighborhood. And we're showing obviously what is there currently. I think we all know that there's a plan aspirationally that's going to grow westward towards our project. So I think what all this boils down to is that, you know, the obvious thing is we have the Interstate 93 that it sort of makes a cleavage in these neighborhoods. And as we all know, the neighborhoods from Winter Hill and East Somerville need to sort of navigate underneath those paths of Mystic as they do. And the folks from 10 Hills, there's really 2 fundamental ways we think that they can access the site. The southwestern tip, they cross over on Blair. There's already a structured crosswalk, and that would lead then to the sidewalk and what we're calling the portal, the entry to the site. So that's one way. And then if you look at the northern part of our drawing, there's also a dedicated crosswalk that takes you to the top of the entry to Assembly Row. And then one would come all the way down that sidewalk if one wanted to, or just come down Middlesex Avenue and find their way to our site and obviously Assembly Row. The East Somerville, there's already a crosswalk there, and it is in the previous project that was presented by our client for 74, there's a crosswalk and that ends up in a park. It's not noted here, but it's at the end of Foley. And then the folks from Assembly Square neighborhood, probably logically for now, would mostly find their way on Foley Street and then would come up Middlesex Avenue or up along the Fellsway sidewalk. What we, I think, didn't probably mention but should as part of the development, this is going to be covered in the next part of our process of the site development, but we have redone or we're planning to redo the sidewalk that circumnavigates that side of our site to make that a safe and you know, a friendly way to cross. So I think then the next slide takes us a little bit more in detail, and a few folks have commented appropriately about the experience that the folks that need to cross under the expressway, what this is like. And so, as Anthony said, there is some method in place here to enhance this experience. I mean, obviously, it'll take working with Department of Transportation and public facilities, but there is a willingness certainly to see what we can do to make that a little bit more hospitable as an experience to cross over. And that's where the sign on the left-hand side would be the entry to the project from the Fellsway side. So, you know, this is just to put some real picture to what is going on here. And then the next slide, I think, gives a little bit of detail at where these neighborhoods would touch down. Again, starting from the top where 10 Hills, there's already obviously a crosswalk that you can come down at the corner of Blair and Fellsway. You cross over, and then you'll find your way to the sidewalk entering Thoroughfare 1. The folks from the Winter Hill neighborhood, you know, the safest route obviously is those 2 underpass connections. Once again, finding your way across to where we had a photo from last time. And then the East Somerville folks can certainly follow their way all the way up, or they may come across at the southern part of the site to 74, the project 74. So these are, you know, for better for worse, I mean, because of the highway, there's not much that the project can do outside of our property line other than certainly being agreeable to enhance, let's say, visually what that experience is like to the best that one can affect, you know, highway structures and highway road system.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Just to clarify, so we have agreed to an additional $7 a square foot in linkage. So we have a number of items that we've called out in that agreement, but just in response to the issues raised and having represented the area, I understand the ongoing issues with crossing those state roads. So we made these commitments to make an effort to support the city to do whatever the city would direct us to do to help improve those and contribute to funds to do that. Moving on, Amelia asked us specifically for, we submitted shadow studies, obviously, in our application, but we were asked specifically about sort of the delta from base height to the waiver request for height. I'm gonna just cover this generally. We pulled out the spring solstice. We submitted all of the additional study to you, but this is the spring solstice, and the reason we usually show this is because, as folks know, in the winter everything's shadowed and dark, and in the summer we have no impacts. So spring is sort of the, you know, the guide. And what it shows is at 9 o'clock, there's a little bit of the corner of 10 Hills, and it's obviously a greater amount on that corner with the additional height. It's, you know, I don't think it's significant. As the board knows, the sun moves, so that shadow is not going to stay where it is at 9. It's probably going to move towards the courthouse and not shade the same areas at 10, 11, and then by 12, it's clear. So, you know, to me, this is given the, you know, the planning desire to have real commercial research institutions here. This is, I think this is responsive to what the board had asked for, and hopefully is not met with any concern. If we could move on. So the next topic is mobility. Michael asked us to really make sure that we did all we could to get aligned with mobility. And this is, as I said at the last meeting, we're going on 18 months working with the city, and we've come a long way. I think particularly around circulation and getting vehicles off Cummings and trying to really create pedestrian bike circulation through the parcel to connect the neighborhoods to Assembly. And I think Michael really went into that at the last meeting. But these are the conditions that were cited in their memo. So we agree to 2 signalized intersections. We're going to let the mobility department guide us in terms of whether those go in. The second one is part of a later condition, so I'll get into it. There was a lot of discussion about Middlesex and Cummings, but we're willing to pay for both signalizations, and the first one would be done as part of the first lab, regardless of which lab goes forward. Second condition, we also agree to. I want to move through these quickly because these are all yeses. Same with respect to analysis, additional signal and traffic analysis, number 3. Thanks, Erica. So this is an interesting one because what was contemplated during the conversations with mobility was either a second signal or a directional change to Cummings. Pat, our traffic person, was not a big fan of changing of having Cummings become a one-way. So we were sort of a hard no on that. And since the last meeting, in the spirit of really supporting mobility, we've agreed to have Cummings as a one-way if it were studied and post development of the site, because we do think that as the site gets built out, we'll have a better sense. Our traffic folks thinks it's better to have two egresses, but we've agreed to study that and make sure that, you know, at the end of the development period, if the traffic department were to select that option of a one-way, we would go along with that. If they decide that it's better to have a second signal, we would go along with that also. They're also, because the Greystar team has put together two parcels, it's important. We don't really know which site will go first, and having Cummings as a one-way could be an impediment just in terms of traversing the site during construction as well. But we've opened the door to this, so I think mobility will appreciate this. Number 5.
Before we move on, can I ask a question, Attorney Guccio? Have you or your team brought this proposed language to mobility or to city staff? And if
Yeah,
so,
well,
what response did you get?
So, yes, immediately after the meeting, I called and said, you know, we want to work on a solution. Unfortunately, I don't want to speak for staff, but there's a paternity leave and a vacation. So, I mean, the good news is, I thought in the traffic department's last memo, there was a little bit of a hint of like putting a white flag up of continuing to debate mode splits and what our traffic analyst thinks versus theirs. So that was fine. It was kind of like agree to disagree on some of the numbers. The big issues were this item, which was whether we would support a directional change. You're making a one-way, and then an issue related to the valet parking. So
Yep. And that's the one I'm more familiar with.
yeah.
What I'm thinking, and tell me if you think I'm off base here, is there are at least two conditions, and I'm aware of this one and the one related to the valet parking, where there is a lack necessarily of agreement between you and your client's proposals and where city staff is. And it seems like there hasn't been, according to what you just mentioned, and tell me if I'm mischaracterizing you, an opportunity to really hash these through when people might not be on leave or vacations or things like that, where it's still potentially a question where we might be able to come to a resolution. Does that?
Having sat through the conversations and heard the passion, you know, a lot of this has to do with, you know, estimates on who's going to work from home, how many SOVs, and like that's fascinating to me, because if you don't have agreement on those, you sort of never come to agreement on final like parking numbers. The directional change is in some ways it's very discretionary, and you know, industry standard for our folks is you want to have two ways to get out. Traffic felt like, you know what, if we can make Cummings less bad, maybe that's better for the neighborhood. Impact on Middlesex less bad. We didn't want to budge on that. So we've conceded that as an option. So I think they would be very pleased with our sort of backing down on that one. In terms of if you want to scroll through, Erica, because we agree to the next one, and then you get to the issue that the chairman is talking to.
Yeah, let's talk about valet too. This is something that I had a chance to speak with staff about earlier.
It's the last one, Erica. Yeah.
I have some thoughts on this. I haven't raised it obviously with the board because it's a public hearing. But I do want to talk about this one as well. Kind of where I'm at, Anthony, is if we're kind of at I wouldn't even say a sticking point. I don't think that's an appropriate way necessarily to put both of these, but I'm not sure we're at a place where we have two conditions that are still kind of big ones that are a little bit in flux that would bring us to a vote this evening necessarily. This is not me saying I'm opposed to anything you and your clients are proposing, or that I'm fully in support of what staff is proposing. I'm wondering if, because there are still some sticking points that might benefit from additional discussion, particularly this next one where I have my own
Yeah.
thoughts, and I'd like to hear where you guys are and where the
Yeah,
board is
no,
on it.
it is. And
That this be continued after a thoughtful discussion.
yeah, it's the holiday season, so I don't want to come off Grinch-like. What I would say is we had a really thorough discussion at City Hall, one of many. And in the last one, the focus was really on Cummings, not on reducing our parking. So it was a little bit of a surprise when we got the memo before the last meeting about reducing parking, because we thought the focus was on Cummings. And what I would say is this, and I want to be sincere and honest about this. I have never permitted a project with less commercial parking than this. My last low ratio in Cambridge was an 8.6. I cannot imagine a scenario where, and just to be quick here, having been involved in a lot, we've been fortunate in this area to have such a hot lab market, and I've been involved in a lot of tenancy negotiations and been involved in those conversations. And as everyone on the board knows, you look at, is this a location that works for our workforce? Is the form build of the lab going to work for the lab that we're looking for, the research facility? Then obviously rents. Then folks take a hard look at parking and the ability to deliver the building. And so we're now at a 0.65 with the valet. Without the valet, we're at a 0.5, which is a residential ratio. I totally get the sentiment of like always pushing for less parking, but this to me is a celebration. And I can't imagine a scenario where we've put valet in place because it's removable, right? That we can dial down that number in time.
Can I, before you can I just interject real quickly, just as one member? I'm not opposed to a discussion on what the condition can look like. I think because it does require a discussion and consideration, and perhaps a little bit more back and forth between your clients, this board, and mobility, as well as the other one for sure. That all I'm saying tonight is I don't think this board is ready for a vote on this application tonight. I think there needs to be some more discussion, and I'm more than willing to engage in that discussion. I'm not on any particular side. I have my own thoughts, but that doesn't mean I'm solid with where I am. That doesn't mean that the rest of the members of the planning board agree with where I am by any stretch. All I'm saying is I think there are two conditions that are, for whatever reason, still up for a little bit of a discussion that would foster us to be in a place where we can have a good talk and maybe take this up in a few weeks for a vote when we've had a chance to think about it, when you've had a chance to think about it, when perhaps you and your team have had a chance to talk to the appropriate city staff. So that's all I'm saying is I don't think the planning board, based on the fact that there are some two somewhat sizable areas of discussion, is not ready to take a vote on this evening. That's all I'm saying.
I get it, Mr. Chair, and just to sort of, but I do want to say, you know how much I respect the city of Somerville, and you know how much I want to see Assembly be competitive as a lab environment. This has been a elongated permitting process. We still have site plan approval, so it's there. This parking ratio is tenuous as it is. I don't expect it to move. I respect the board's challenge with all staff being gone, and I signaled on Monday after the meeting willingness to talk. One thing I would just point out, because I know all of you care deeply, is, you know, Somerville communicates through portals, and I'm really working hard to sort of break that down, because every time I've come to an impasse on, you know, a traffic issue or an urban design issue, you walk up to City Hall, you sit down, and you try to get as close as you can to the city position. That's not that easy to do, and I think the timeline of the permitting sort of reflects that. But I don't want to give you the impression, like, I'm really proud of the fact that we've moved on, particularly Cummings, and the solution to have valet, and to, you know, just to make this case, because we're here anyway. It's not exactly a great situation to tell a tenant, you've leased this many spaces. However, if they're not utilized, they're gonna be taken away during the course of a lease. So we think this is a significant give, and not one that is, you know, not one that certainly a leasing agent would say is a good idea. But we hope the board sees this as a big step forward. And my guess is if mobility were here, they'd say, we still don't like the valet parking, but you know, thanks for the effort. Mr. Chair, could I finish the presentation?
Of course, I didn't mean
Okay.
to take us off track quite so much. I do recognize
No,
that Andrew Graminsky at PPZ is here, and I want you to finish the presentation that you all have, and then we're going to have a pretty thoughtful discussion, I think.
I appreciate it. And I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Chair. It's not a surprise. Erica, do you want to just keep moving? Oh, just to put a head on it. So what we proposed was to have a utilization study after build out within 3 years to start to have a utilization study, and then have reductions to meet the utilization. The good news is we're not building more parking. So it allows us to reduce that valet to potentially get to a 0.5. So again, we thought this was the way to sort of meet the challenge of being competitive in terms of the market, but also recognize mobility's long-term goal. And obviously we've agreed to all these other conditions and things that we've worked through and been happy to deliver for the mobility department. You want to keep going, Erica? Thanks. So we've had great conversations with Andrew working through. So we're looking for a little flexibility. As you know, two owners came together to really deliver a whole site, which, as the board knows, some of the challenges with planning is when you have disparate ownership, you can't deliver the kind of holistic circulation plan and open space plan that you can when you consolidate ownership. So, but having two parcels, we want to be in a situation where both parcels are ready, and if there's tenant interest, and in all my large projects, the parcel that I thought was going to go first didn't go first. It's very interesting to see when tenants come along and they say, no, we like that site better. So we've just asked for a little bit of flexibility, subject to planning staff's review around phasing, and also around the ability to move forward with site plan approval. As you can see, Greystars continues to be motivated, and the team is motivated to get both sites ready, so that we can be in a position, if interest rates come down and the market moves, we can deliver to tenants. And I think we're in a good place on these issues with Andrew, but he can speak to that. That's it. And then we do have one slide. You didn't ask for this, Mr. Chair, but just to highlight the the overall economic value to the city. You're aware of the tax rate and the amount of square footage here. Rachel and economic development, despite the fact that linkage has been codified and has been increased, folks at economic development still wanted to get that $7 extra in additional linkage. So we agreed to that, and we've had great conversations. A lot of the improvements that we're looking to make and have been asked to make can be credited against that. So we think we found a good way to get a win-win there. And so this just outlines. I will say as you know, hotels are great because you get a double tax. And building permit fee, I'm not going to estimate that, but it's significant. So that's all. This is all in the mix, and that tax number is at build out annually, obviously. So that just gives you the sense of economic value, and that concludes the presentation.
Attorney Galuccio, I really appreciate the presentation and the mid-presentation brief discussion. What I'd like to do is actually invite Andrew Griminsky back in. I don't know if he's still here on camera. Here he is. Andrew, I'm wondering if you have any representations on behalf of city staff. Mobility is kind of a little bit of the sticking point with the parking issue. The applicant had made certain proposed modifications for certain conditions. I'm wondering if you can speak to the staff's response on those.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, as Mr. Galuccio stated, we do have some staff and mobility, Director Rawson and Justin Schreiber, Senior Planner, who have been either on paternity leave or vacation, which has obviously made some conversations like this more difficult since they're out of the office. But I will say regarding the condition relating to the valet spaces, before Justin left, we did work on some sort of alternative related to a sunset clause for those valet spaces. Well, I should say mobility had some language regarding, I believe it was a 5-year period. It would sunset after that 5-year period, and then those 197 spaces would disappear. I will point out when it comes to conditions related to either removing something later on or having a study conducted relating to removing, in this case, parking, is hard to enforce on ISD's end. And I just wanted to make sure that the board is aware that we've had conversations with ISD in the past regarding conditions that are worded that way when it comes to enforcement in the future, especially when, let's just say, underground parking, what's that space going to become? Is it just going to be paved over? Again, this is just from our past experience with working with ISD on enforcement issues later on. I wanted to make sure that you had that information. We can confirm with ISD, if that's helpful for you, that yes, these types of conditions are difficult to enforce, but ultimately the board will be making these decisions. Again, as staff, I just want to make sure you have all the proper information you need to make that decision. Regarding the Cumming Street becoming one way and the applicant's recommendations for an alternative, that I believe has not been reviewed by mobility. The last correspondence I had with Director Rawson was beginning of last week. And he said we could loop back in January if this case is still moving through the permitting process. So that's the last I've heard from them. I'm not going to speak on behalf of them for that condition. I hope that was helpful.
Thank you very much. We'll call on you to engage in some discussion as we move forward in thinking about this application, but I saw Lynn's hand raised. I'd like to be able to recognize Lynn, who is muted, unfortunately.
Yes, thank you both for that mid conversation. I actually see it from the city side as well as it from the developer side. So we all know that building structured parking in a real estate market like Somerville is not inexpensive. We're not talking about like surface level parking, which can be redeveloped, 10 years later. We're talking about structured parking underground. It's incredibly expensive to build. And so I understand it from Anthony's perspective, from Greystar. It's like, we're going to be bringing in tenants. We need to ensure that there's enough parking. I also understand it from, the city side as well. I think a really bad outcome is we're going to build 197 extra spaces, and then at some point in the future they may go away. I'm like, go away? It occurs to me, and this is a question for city staff, that perhaps the solution is not to think about parking for these individual lab buildings that are coming in, because they are part of a broader redevelopment of Assembly Square. You've got the Target, the Trader Joe's, all of that at some point, if everything goes well, is going to be redeveloped. What about creating a parking district that you're managing parking now for Assembly Square? Because right across the street is good for potentially in 10 years, a whole new redevelopment. And now we have extra spaces under these lab buildings, or these lab buildings need extra spaces, and they're there to start thinking about parking kind of as a whole, a parking district. And in that way, the developer Greystone has a little bit more flexibility, or is granted that greater flexibility, right? Because perhaps it's not needed, but other people are going to be using it. And maybe the extra 197 spaces now, because frankly, this area is not particularly walkable. It's not particularly transit oriented, not now. It can be. Places evolve. So by creating a parking district at this juncture, we're providing the assurance to the developer that they can make the numbers work for their tenants, et cetera, et cetera. Then as Assembly evolves, we now build less and less parking because we have it as a whole. So that's something, Mr. Chair, that I would like us to ask the city to consider, because it feels to me it splits it's a solution that both fits with what the city's trying to do vis-a-vis parking and mobility, as well as fit what Greystone's trying to do and bringing in this lab space. And a lot of other cities have done it in very dense areas, and it's been incredibly successful. Anyway.
No, Lynn, I appreciate that. And I'm pleased to report that this is actually something that we have discussed at Assembly in years prior, as looking at what the needs of the entire district would be as opposed to individual parcels. And this was, I believe, and I know Andrew's still on camera, this is something that was raised as a point of discussion in the Assembly Square neighborhood plan, was it not?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, I would have to consult with the current draft document. I wasn't involved with this plan development. Senior planner Lewis was, who was also out. So this is something, though, that
it's a bad time if you have.
I appreciate the feedback, Member Richards. I think that's a great idea. I will point out that Assembly does have a Transportation Management Association. The name is not coming to my head at the moment. It's at the tip of my tongue, but there is an organization that I believe Greystar is willing to participate in. I see Ryan shaking his head. So I wanted to point out that to the board that right now Assembly, most of the parking is commercial garages, meaning that they're public. Anyone can park there. I think most or everyone's familiar, especially in the marketplace. The first 3 hours is free or something, and then depending on the garage, there's a different charge. Assembly has almost 10,000 spaces. It's quite a big number. I just wanted to point that out if it's helpful. But regarding a parking district, I will have to follow back up with that. Thank you.
Because we're going to have, Mr. Chair, we're going to have this conversation again in 3 or 4 years when all of that. And so instead of thinking about this incrementally, let's think about it as a whole, because the place isn't particularly walkable right now. It's going to get there. And in the short term, we need to provide some assurance to the developers as well as the tenants. Anyway, it feels like a good,
No,
middle way.
I fully agree with you that I wish we had a codified neighborhood plan, because I think it would make the discussion of individual applications more fruitful because we can look at it in the scope of a cohesive plan. We don't have one now, but Lynn, I'm actually on board with exactly kind of what you're saying. And I know Ryan's had his hand up, but I do want to make sure I don't leave you out in the cold there, my friend, if you want to raise something during the
Yeah,
benefit of this
happy
discussion.
to provide some context to Member Richards' feedback on two items. I think to continue the topic of conversation here, and just to highlight, I think while not a necessarily cohesive district plan for parking, mobility is thinking in this context longer term. Just to flag all, as Andrew mentioned, all parking garages are public parking garages. They're not tied to the commercial use or to building use. Having been through the 74 Middlesex, site plan review process, we do have electronic signage on Middlesex that indicates the available parking in the garage. So there are steps that are moving towards that conceptual plan that Member Richards is mentioning, but maybe not in the, I guess mobility is pushing that topic, maybe not in a formalized, cohesive manner, but conceptually moving towards that. And we look to continue that as well. And we do look at availability of parking within assembly, and the ability to use that as kind of overflow parking. And that is part of our sales pitch on 74 Middlesex as well. Not only parking in the building, and that is an argument that we have to deal with when we're in the leasing process, our current parking ratio at 74 Middlesex, but that there is availability of parking within the greater assembly district, that there are ways to get around and to, there is free parking for retail users that come in some of the garages within the Assembly Row district. So I just wanted to flag that from a more practical consideration, having been through the process and in the neighborhood. And then the second piece was on the valet. What happens to those spaces? I think for us, valet is really an operationally intensive kind of practice, not a space. When you lose valet spaces, you're really talking about tandem parking, parking in aisles of the garage that are underutilized. So it's really designed as a parking garage, and an operational component gets layered on to achieve this additional parking to meet the market demand. Obviously, that comes at a significant cost to the building operationally. So there's not only the cost of constructing the garage in each space, but of operating it. And as soon as market conditions would warrant, downsizing that operation and potentially removing it, whether it be through general requirements as the area becomes more walkable, or other parking that's available in assembly, we'd naturally be inclined to remove that, because it will require multiple valet attendants operating in the garage on a daily basis.
Mr. Chair, could I also Ryan, thank you. The other point I wanted to make as to ISD, and I totally appreciate that. I will give, since I was a little critical earlier, and I should say thank you to the board for having a meeting so close to the holiday. So frustration is not.
I made sure our January 2nd meeting was not happening. So
well, God bless you.
They're trying to kill us.
No. But I would say, with respect to enforcement, I think Somerville was one of the first communities that really hired somebody specifically to enforce conditions that get thrown around at BCA hearings and in planning board conditions. And to their credit, because I think, to Andrew's point, there's always the issue of monitoring. I would say that in today's day and age, because I've been down this road, particularly in Kendall Square, where there's a big lab district with disparate owners and different commercial garages, the monitoring now is intense, and the burden can easily be placed on the special permit applicant to do the monitoring. And if this many folks are averaging the garage usage that's flagged, they have an obligation to notify the city. Like, we can draft this so that it's wholly on the applicant's burden. And if they don't perform the study and report, which I'm sure there's going to be reporting anyway, just in terms of PDTM, that then their special permit would be not in compliance. So I think parking is one of the things that I think is on the easier side of monitoring conditions, but we're certainly amenable to whatever language change is necessary to put that burden on the applicant and make sure the city doesn't have to chase anyone around on that. And Ryan, thank you. I assumed from everything we've said over the last year is these aren't, Lynn, additional spaces that, you know, you'd cordon off. It's space within the garage. The number of spaces would Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you got rid of valet, the number of spaces would drop to close to a 0.5, correct? Like the number of non-obstructed, non-tandem spaces?
Yeah, exactly. We look at it as striped spaces, and then the valet operates outside of that striped space number within dead spaces and aisles and
Okay.
other.
I don't want to cut in on Lynn's time that she's recognized for. Not that I won't recognize you again, but that clarifies some of how I was thinking about this space. But Lynn, please continue if you have other thoughts or other questions. It's
No,
still your spotlight.
Well, thank you very much. I'll cede the floor. I made my point. It's a recommendation for the city. I think a parking district is something that the city sets up and does it. And I think it could be a potential solution here and kind of moving forward to better manage parking kind of throughout this area instead of at the lab level.
I think I saw Amelia's hand. I see it again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, echo your sentiments about not being prepared to advance this without more clear buy-in on the alternative solutions from mobility. The funny thing about Assembly is that there is this expectation that applicants will come in with requests for bigger, taller buildings than what the base zone is, but there is no obligation for the city to provide those entitlements, right? There's an obligation. We're looking for you to come propose a project that is a good project that has mitigation that is proportionate to the scale that you're developing. And so looking at it from that lens, yes, the ratios, I understand the desire for the ratios to be aligned with what is, in the commercial market, but the ratios are what they are in part and lower than you might like if we can't resolve this valet issue because you are proposing so much additional FAR. So I think that, there are two levers here. I just want to be mindful of that because our goal as a board is to come up with a solution that balances the benefits to the city of development with the very real, especially transportation impacts of additional vehicles moving through Assembly. Thank you.
See, Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to echo Vice Chair Aboff's comments. One of the things about the ratio that we're so laser focused on is there's a numerator and a denominator, right? And so I do also realize that part of the parking problem is caused by the extra ask for additional height, right? So if you weren't looking for more height than what was currently at least drawn in the neighborhood drawings, then that ratio wouldn't be quite as challenged as it is right now. So just for what it's worth, it's not lost on me that this problem is arguably self-induced. It doesn't mean we shouldn't try to address it and accommodate it, but it just emphasizes the feel that I would really appreciate mobility ultimately, coming to terms and an agreement with you. And I think another potential option, just to throw it out there, Member Richards proposed this, or at least brought up the idea on, some other case a few weeks ago that, there are other cities that have very limited parking, but they're able to kind of meet their on-site needs by way of shuttles and other, third-party services. And I think that would be something that I would actually be personally pretty excited about as well. Because that would allow you to better connect to the metro system we have nearby. It also could take advantage of other currently established parking structures and things like that. So just I just want to kind of put that idea in the back of your head in case that could kind of help be another answer to the problem. So I don't have any questions. I just want to, reemphasize my ask to make sure that mobility gets on board with this particular issue.
Mr. Chair, could I just, and Michael, trust me, I heard you loud and clear, and there was a zesty conversation after the hearing to make a beeline up to mobility. So we get that. We're absolutely interested in district-wide solutions. I do want to say a 0.65 is not competitive with anything in this region. So if we were at a 8.7, you wanted us down to an 8. So from a competitive standpoint, there's a point where it becomes a deal breaker to invest in construction and take economic risk if the parking is just too low that it's not going to be marketable. But so I want to say that. I also just want Ryan to speak to, this was planned and zoned with sort of specific intent in terms of commercial drivers for the city and becoming a competitive research environment with places in Cambridge and Watertown and elsewhere. So you follow the planning and zoning intent, which is significant density here. It's not without its challenges in terms of it buttressing highways, and it's on the edge of assembly. So we're trying to overcome those challenges. But yeah, we're a little bit over the FAR. But I'm not sure, and I'll let Ryan speak to this, if reducing the height by a couple floors got us, to a 0.5, that would be an easy solution. But I don't think Greystar is in a position, given what's out there. And again, this is a very low ratio, and I think it sends a real message for Somerville. But I'm not sure reducing height is going to align with a reduction in parking, because that's a different analysis. And if it makes for a less competitive lab building, I mean, just speaking from Cambridge Crossing, the reason we were able to compete with Kendall was because we put really good sized lab campus space available, and we ended up being super competitive with Kendall, which no one thought we could, but it was because of the build form labs that we put there. And that got labs next to railroad tracks that, by the way, which really benefited Somerville, because we rezoned this to create those bigger lab footprints in Somerville. And the first 2 buildings had lab. One was all in Somerville and one was partially in Somerville. But Ryan, can you speak to the sort of the height issue as it relates to parking? Because I just want to, if those are aligned, that's great. I'd love to finish the permitting on this piece and move forward. But if they're not aligned, we should probably say that too, because I don't want to leave the board with unreasonable expectations.
I mean, from a market perspective, tenants in the market, rightfully or wrongfully, look at ratios, less so than total spaces. Ratios available, and there's kind of a market nomenclature, and 0.8 is a 0.8 per 1,000 square foot of rentable commercial space is the ratio that most tenants target. You find around that 0.8 to 0.9 in East Cambridge, in Kendall Square. In Watertown, you find well north of that. In the Seaport, you find about that. And I think that's what Anthony's trying to highlight. I think we've already taken steps to bring that below kind of a market threshold, and we're experiencing some level of pushback now in our current project, and do have real-time insight. So we are, focused on that ratio from a marketability perspective. And I think a lot of the solutions we've tried to work with the mobility are how do we avoid this being a day one issue in tenancy, but find a path towards meeting our shared goals and vision for what the assembly district will be in the long term. And that's where the valet solution came to fruition. Actually, is included in the 74 Middlesex project as well. And I think at that time we were able to win some consensus for it. Obviously, that still has not played out seeing the actual usage and reduction over time that will take significant time to play out. But we felt a good hybrid solution to allow these to be marketable buildings today, but to allow for adjustments in the future as the world changes and evolves.
Yeah, Michael,
Thank you.
it's still on you.
All right. I appreciate that feedback, and do appreciate that you guys are targeting abnormally low ratios. So that for what it's worth, I do hear that, and I appreciate that. Just to kind of make sure I'm articulating my point thoroughly. For what it's worth, I appreciate that you are bringing us a market signal that you think that you need to hit, right? When we discussed parking minimums at a previous meeting, I was very supportive of saying, like, let's let developers tell us how much parking we need for a given, structure, right? So I'm very supportive of that mindset. But I also want to make sure we understand here that the ratio could be met if we kept the number of spaces constant and reduce the number of square feet. Right. So the point I meant to articulate earlier, if it wasn't clear, you're asking for more height than what was originally in the neighborhood plan. And you are now in a position where you have a higher amount of square footage compared to the amount of parking spaces that mobility seems excited about. And so one other way to fix that ratio is reducing that height again, reducing the number of tenants, reducing that demand, right? So I'm not pushing back on your point that there's a market demand for a certain ratio. I can accept that. I think what I'm saying is either we should try to find an alternative solution to the problem such that that market signal is being met in another form, i.e. a shuttle, or trying to find another answer here, just because I feel like the ratio is potentially a consequence of the fact that we're asking for a more ambitious building. So just want to make sure that was super clear.
I just want to say thank you to Michael for articulating the point I was trying to make far more clearly. Thank you so much for capturing that.
And Ryan, do you want to respond? Thank you. I did hear that, and I trust me, it was clear. All I'm going to do is encourage an honest conversation. I'm not as vested as you, but I've been vested for a long time in the success of Assembly as a lab-centric destination. So I would just encourage my client. It's not just about parking. It's about the build form. It's about to have a super competitive lab approved so that we can say we're ready and we can deliver this when somebody's competing with Watertown or Cambridge or other places. So it's all those things. If shaving some height and density would answer the call, we probably would have come in with it tonight. It's a lot of things. So I just want to foster an honest conversation, because I think at the end of the day, if we permit lab buildings that are not super competitive, you won't have lab and assembly, particularly in this market. We'll be 5-7 years from now, and you'll have the 99 and you'll have the Quintana Hotel, and folks will look back and say, was there anything more we could have done? That's fine. But Ryan, if we can move, I will encourage movement. But Ryan, I just want you to speak honestly about sort of the competitiveness in terms of the buildings itself as well, just so the board knows sort of where you stand.
Yeah, I think in our initial presentation in the last meeting, we went through some of the history, but probably not in as much detail. But as we started initially conceptualizing the site and working with pre-meetings with city staff, with community constituents, and including the Mystic View Task Force and other groups that we're familiar with that have a long history in Assembly, the challenge was put to us that this is the area within Somerville and within Assembly that is targeted for high density commercial use. And we were encouraged to go higher. I believe there was a quote, I don't want to misquote a member of the Mystic View Task Force, but go as high, it was advertised, please go as high as you can, because this is an important part of the economic component of the future of what Somerville would be. So we responded to that, and there's a lot of detail that came through that process. There wasn't a magic number on 18 stories of height and usable floors and what came from that. It was an evolution. Some of the heights dictated by interstitial mechanical floors and sizing, mechanical spacing right for a building in this size. But we did have two, I'd say, squatter but bigger floor plate buildings that we envisioned for the site initially. We were encouraged to stick with the lab typology within Somerville zoning that's limited to 35,000 square foot floor plates and introduce a hotel use. And the way we accomplished that while maintaining the economic picture of or viability of the project was by going narrower but taller, for lack of a better word, and adding an additional use in there and some of the circulation and civic space areas that you've seen. So I just there's a lot of history that we're probably not fully prepared to revisit there, but I just wanted to provide a high level context of kind of how we reached this conclusion. And obviously I think we're talking about in the context of parking here, but there was some larger context that encouraged us and motivated us to really push density and what this site could be that we've been working, work through for several years. Obviously it's, the conflict is coming now with the parking, but just wanted to provide that bigger context.
Yeah, no.
Just want to add for the context of my fellow board members who may or may not have had an opportunity to review it, that the assembly neighborhood plan that is not yet adopted, but which was received very positively, does indeed identify this part of assembly as an area for some of the tallest buildings in the zone. But there isn't really a height range specified. It just says, so that it's broken down and it says, in this area, more than 15 stories. So I went to that trying to use that as a framework to understand a little bit better how to think about this proposal, which I think is both at 18 stories at this stage. And I do feel like that's a reasonable interpretation of more than 15 stories without being too aggressive. But at the same time, if we can't come to a solution that creates a building that is felt to be commercially viable by the applicant team and a traffic situation that is felt to be aligned with the neighborhood and city planning principles of the mobility department, I don't feel like that means we should proceed with a commercial use that doesn't meet the city's standards for neighborhood planning. Like, it is the applicant's goal to create an economically viable building, and we are absolutely wanting to support that however we can. But that's not the remit of the board, right? The remit of the board is to adhere to the planning principles and support this development as a neighborhood. So it's just my 2 cents.
Mr. Chair, could I be helpful? Because I feel like there's a holiday spirit that needs to come over me at this time. We none of us can control the fact that we intersected with vacations and leave. We need to go back with New Year inspiration and work with mobility and see if we can't move this a little, because I think for so many reasons, getting these sites entitled to get assembly in a place where all the owners can say, come see us, we want to be your lab destination, is important at many levels at the city of Somerville that I've heard. So let's I don't want to give a lot of false expectations, but it's clear that this isn't going to get approved without mobility's comments. And I'm always happy to go meet with Brad and Justin again. I'm in the middle of, some debate over mode splits that are like way above my pay grade, but it's fascinating to me because a lot of the numbers, a lot of the desire lines around numbers come out of assumptions based on behavior that everybody's guessing on, right? So, Michael, I take your comments about, are there other things we can do? Lynn, your comments about a district. Amelia, very pointed comments about, how you will look at the build form if we can't sort of move the dial let's take a break. We would have loved to have gotten this approved going into the holiday, but let's take a break and again, Andrew's been fantastic. I mean, he's worked tirelessly, so we'll recircle back after the new year and see what we can come up with if that makes sense.
Identification.
So I think it does.
Did you have
Obviously,
instructions
because the
on it?
board's not in a position to
Yeah,
vote on each side irrespective, and I always think it's more beneficial to have, additional discussions based on some of the concerns that were raised. I will say one of the thoughts, because I wanted to let my colleagues, speak and have their thoughts, raised, so it always informs how I think of things too. One of the things I had thought about earlier than this meeting, but also has been bolstered by what you've suggested, as well as some of what my colleagues have talked about, is the idea of not having a hard sunset potentially on some of these issues, which is what I think mobility had suggested, but having a utilization report at some point to figure out whether it still makes sense to, if we end up allowing a valet use that allows basically to cram in more cars than otherwise would be allowed. Whether that still makes sense, whether you are using it, whether the remainder of the spaces that are built are being used. I know I don't usually like having a vote on something that's going to be a hard no or a hard sunset without having some idea of when that sunset happens, if it still makes sense. Because nobody can predict what a site or a plan will actually look like by the time an otherwise arbitrary deadline has been set. So that's one of the things I was thinking of, was having you come back, and if we allow you to do what you're seeking a permit to do, coming back in a period of time to reevaluate whether A, you still need it and want it, and B, if we still think it makes sense.
Interesting.
So.
Meaning a mechanism where you come back to the planning board. Interesting. Yeah.
That was a thought that I had. That's certainly not something that I don't know if the rest of the board shares, or if mobility or PPZ shares as well, but I don't want to vote against what's seems to be otherwise a good project on something that we might be able to meet in the middle on, to have some sort of a creative solution to. But we are not there yet, and I have no idea whether I'm going to be told by the city this is not something at all we want to consider or would recommend the planning board do. Sometimes that happens, but I do want to at least have the opportunity to have that discussion to see if there is a way that we can come to some sort of agreement, whether it's that or something else.
And Mr. Chair,
but that both you and your client and PBC and mobility, and everybody can make
I
that
know my head's
recommendation.
going to spin with different iterations of things that I can do to appease little bits and pieces of everything that was said. That's actually from a planning perspective, that's interesting to me, because the planning board would learn more about the environment if there's a report back. So that's an interesting concept, and we'll continue to talk to leasing folks about sort of like what becomes a hard stop with a tenant around a number of spaces. But all I can say is Greystar's been great and tried to be as flexible as possible. And also Andrew's comment about enforceability. So like, I want to think about all those things, and yeah.
Those are the things I wanted to raise, at least tonight. I think we have a lot of things to think about over the next couple of weeks. And I hope nobody thinks too hard about it, because I hope everybody's enjoying some time with family. anybody else have anything that they'd like to add for the benefit of the meeting before we ask this team to reconvene in the new year? Okay. Seeing none, I want to thank you all for the updated presentation and for the thoughtful discussion that we had tonight. And I'm going to move to continue this agenda item to the 16th. Seconded by Amelia. Steve, can you please call the roll?
Luke Schuster? Oh, Luke Schuster is, sorry, he's absent.
That's okay.
Mike,
He is, no, Luke is here. He's off camera.
oh, okay, great. Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Hi. See you in a couple. I think this 16th meeting is going to be a little bit overbooked, so we'll see what happens with it.
We'll do as much work as we can. Happy holidays. Thank you.
Thank you.
You
Happy
all as well.
holidays.
The planning board does have some other items that it sometimes leaves as other business. There's the last meeting of the year. It's almost 8 o'clock. Luke is I think putting his kids to bed. So I think it makes sense for the benefit of us to say good evening and happy holidays and happy new year, and we'll see you all on the 16th unless anybody feels a pressing urge to move on. But I will rebuff at every possible opportunity. Okay. Seeing none, the chair moves to adjourn, seconded by Amelia. Steve, can you please call the roll?
Luke Schuster,
Aye.
Michael McNeely,
Aye.
Lynn Richards,
Aye.
Jahan Habib,
Aye.
Amelia Aboff,
Aye.
and Michael Capuano.
Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you all for a great 2024 and see you in 2025. Aye.
Bye all.
Bye.
Take care.
Good night.